Welcome to everybody. It will start soon.
So maybe we should kick off. So I decided to start now by welcoming the people who are here early in time, and maybe just giving the hand to Solène Marquette, who leads the BNS, the Business and Society Initiative of the INSEAD Alumni Association in France. And she's going to say a few words about the Business and Society group. So Solène.
Yes, okay, thank you. You can move the slide forward. Yeah. Hi, everyone. So just a few words to make sure you all know about the business and society initiatives within the Alumni Association. So we are a group launched almost 3 years ago by notably Sophie Boyer-Chamard, and we rather gather regularly every month or so to discuss, brainstorm about how to better align businesses with societal interests. So we are now more or less 50 people, and at least 15, let's say 15, 20 of us active members. So you will see to launch several initiatives. So we are very welcoming you if you want to join. As an example, you can read on this slide, some members of the group help the association define its purpose statement, which you can read here, which is, like the school, also focus on creative change for business, in business and society. And so the purpose of the group is to help the association, the alumni, to support the organizations to create this positive social impact while doing business. You can switch the slides, please. So we have launched already several initiatives, as you can see, with 3 key pillars, which are awareness, advocacy, and actions. So we launch notably events like this one. We try to work a lot with the other clubs and to launch thematics events as well with them. Maybe some of you have seen, we have like the Climate College workshops, which have started, also led by Aude. So many initiatives are in progress. You're very welcome to join, as well as if you have other ideas of initiatives you would like to join, please don't hesitate and join us. You have normally a Slack link which should appear. If not, I will also write it down in the chat. Thank you, and I hope to see you soon. Aude, back to you.
Yes. So now let me launch our discussion by introducing the subject. So the main question we are looking at today is, will business for good thrive or just survive in the post-COVID era? So we mean business for good is an umbrella term to talk about all these policies that have in common that they address the issue of business responsibility over society, business responsibility and impact over society. So this alludes to purpose, this alludes to social CSR, to social responsibility of the policies, to impact, to ESG, and all those policies. So the question is, what's going to happen now for business for good in the future? Are we entitled to have an optimistic vision, in which case there's a sort of a strong inflection of the curve, and we're heading towards great progress in business, in the unraveling of business for good? Or are we coming back to a more business as usual post-COVID gentle progression of business for good in business? Or on the contrary, should we have a pessimistic vision even, which is that under the pressure of economic recovery, under the pressure of digitalization or whatever, business for good is even threatened to decline? Now, we had these questions and we raised these questions during the COVID period because we had discussions, we had surveys, and we had facts that revealed us that there were increased tensions between profit policies and profit-only policies on one side, and purpose-driven or business for good-driven policies on the other side. And these tensions appeared, which were tensions and contradictions, appeared at several levels. At the level of business leaders in general, because some businesses and some business leaders showed unique preoccupation for profit, whereas others, particularly in the COVID time, whereas others were seeing that there were a force for business for good emerging, and also at CSR leader level. And also we had facts and events, and one emblematic fact and event was the Danone case, we can call it that way, which was the eviction or the dismissal of Emmanuel Faber, sorry, the eviction from the board and as CEO at Danone. And the question and the discussion that was raised was, is this the victory of profit over purpose? And some people were thinking so, and some people were even thinking that this was not proper to Danone, but was also proper to business in general. So here we come back to our question. With these tensions, will business for good thrive or just survive? And before, in fact, passing the word to our dear panelists, we wish to start with what you think and where you are. So here we're going to have a small poll for you. How do you feel business for good will develop in the near future? And here you have under your eyes a graph where in fact you can see that you have two questions in one. The first question on the graph is, if you, on the left side, are you pessimistic about business for good, in which case you think it will just survive? Or are you optimistic about business for good thriving in the future? And if you read it from on the vertical axis, are you in a position to be involved in business for good policies in your business? Or on the lower side, are you witness only in your business? Are you just interested, but not really actor of business for good policies? So please answer. And let's see what comes out. I have absolutely no idea. I don't know if I can vote. No, we can't. So Juliana, this is under your control, eh?
Yes.
Let's wait and see. Okay, so it's interesting to know for each of us. Huh? So half of us in this panel are involved directly in business for good policies, half for more witness, and there's more optimism than pessimism, but there is some pessimism. So it's a balance, and the question that proves that the question has some relevance. So let's now discuss. So now let me present our panel. Jean-Christophe Loger, Anne-Laure Noat, Helle Lyoto, and Subi Rangan. Sorry, Subi, for using your short name. It's easier for me. So, Jean-Christophe first is leader of Inclusio and founder of Inclusio, and in a network partner called Istra, which is a consultancy network dealing with inclusive business and from strategy to implementation. And Jean-Christophe was also former leader of sustainability at Danone, and on the One Health and responsible for a part of the One Planet, One Health agenda for more than 15 years. So this is why he has many, many things to say. Anne-Laure is partner, ex-com member in charge of the practice Society and Responsible Economy at Eurogroup Consulting, which is a major independent group, European independent group. And so as such, she is witness of many corporations and their way of dealing with business for good. Helle is president of B-Lab France. So B-Lab is the global network, just for those who don't know about it, is the global network that creates standards, policies, and tools for business and certifies companies which are named B Corps, who are leading the way in transforming the global economy from an economy of profit only to an economy that has a responsibility in which business has a responsibility over society and the planet. And the community is growing, includes 4,000 B Corps in 70 countries, and over 100,000 companies who are using the B Corp assessment tool, the B Impact Assessment, and these SDG action managers. And Subi is a professor of strategy and management at INSEAD that probably at least some, if not many of you enjoy very much for his deep thinking. And Subi's work is exploring the future of capitalism and how enterprises may better integrate performance and progress. And he initiated the Society for Progress, a fellowship of philosophers, social scientists, and business leaders. So Subi is in not only as a professor of strategy, but for this deep examination of performance and progress. So I'm starting with Jean-Christophe. And so this is our question in general, exploring these tensions and contradictions between purpose and profit within organizations. Will business for good thrive or just survive? And for Jean-Christophe, of course, a specific focus on Danone. And is Danone, in fact, is the dismissal of Emmanuel Faber, meaning a victory of profit over purpose. Jean-Christophe?
Thank you, Aude, and thank you for the invitation this morning. Let me just highlight first things that we're talking maybe here about a tension between short-term profit and purpose. Because I don't think that anyone's going to challenge the fact that any organization has to deliver a profit, and the tension in the case of Danone has been basically reinforced by the fact that this is a stock exchange company. There is a big difference between a stock exchange company and a family-owned business. The context of Danone is also very specific because this is a company that is named fast-moving consumer goods. And fast-moving means, in the case of Danone, that is basically rather small compared to some giants, even though it has been growing. The model of Danone was designed on growth and indeed a certain return and a certain level of profitability. Why I don't want to oppose in the case of Danone, purpose and profit, and I'm going to talk about long-term, is because the new team in charge has been confirming that Danone will remain a benefit corporation, an entreprise à mission. So you heard that one of the first decisions taken by the new CEO was to remain an entreprise à mission, a benefit corporation. So the situation of Danone is a little bit probably more complex to the one we've seen. What I want to also stress is that Danone has been one of the major leader of core transformation of its business model through a strategy that has been designed since the past 15 years with no doubt about this, a clear vision here. And Emmanuel Faber has been a clear pioneer in this. What did happen is probably, if I may add a couple of things on top of this famous activist investors, a lot of short-term tension in the deployment of this new ambition. What is important for an organization such as Danone and for any type of organization that is connected to this fast-moving goods consumer sectors is the fact that Danone is a company of brand. And brand should, as much as possible, reflect the ambition, the societal ambition, the mission of the company. And it has been very difficult for those brands because even though they were belonging to a company model that was designed on a culture of the dual project, social and economic, some of the brands have been growing in a context of mass consumption. I think that it is very difficult to shift a brand such as Activia, turning this brand that was named a blockbuster into something that was clearly reflecting what was the new ambition of this interdependence between an environmental, a social, and an economic performance. So Danone has been tremendously investing since the past year in the transformation of its bottom line. And we have to acknowledge now that sustainability is clearly requesting money. It's a time to invest. Shifting a production line to have a yogurt pot in paper is extremely expensive. And so engaging all this type of transformation and the procurement team rethinking about localization of certain type of ingredient is also very costly. When the brand are maybe a little bit too slow or have a difficulty to engage the consumer is indeed a major risk. And my conviction is that probably in the case of Danone, a couple of brands didn't embrace in the way they should or they could have done this new vision. That's one point. And shortly, the second point, such transformation in an organization that is facing this tremendous pressure. You understand a stock exchange with a high return expectation from investors. With this level of shifting a lot of its practices, middle management is critical, and it can't be the so-called only responsibility of a leader to carry on this new vision and to implement it. We face strong difficulty in managing contradiction. And this middle management in some of its situation have been tremendously under pressure, transitioning a business to a new model, but still having to manage a performance that was basically mostly driven by the old model, so-called. And that really creates probably a gap between a vision and a strategy that is, for me, one of the most advanced that I have seen in the FMCG sector, and what was happening on a daily basis with the team. And you know, we don't have the same vision of time for a person that is facing on a daily basis this pressure. It is indeed difficult to recognize that it is a long-term process. So two things, if I may summarize, adding the overall context. I'm not saying that the activist hasn't pushed for something that highlight again the need for a short-term return. What I want to stress is that whatever you do when you engage such transition with this level of investment that is requested for a company like this one, top line growth is critical, and your brands have to walk the talk. And the second thing is such transition is needing a full engagement and the maximum consistency with the middle management to make sure that they will overcome indeed certain type of contradiction that everyone will have to manage in his professional life.
Thank you very much, Jean-Christophe. As a conclusion, in your words, are you optimistic for these big corporations? For which you point out so many difficulties, have you an optimistic vision, or a rather nuanced vision?
Well, the topic is now scaling up. The question is, how do we scale all the innovation that I saw in a lot of large corporations? And this process of scaling up is requesting co-creation, alliance to generate a system change. Where I'm not so optimistic is that today those alliances, those partnership probably are also going too slow compared to the pressure that we feel from the environmental perspective and a social perspective. But I am optimistic because I saw those alliances, those partnerships raising. A company taken by its own can't do anything because they are part of an ecosystem, and you know, you need a critical mass to generate this systemic transformation. And probably we will need a little push of different type of institution to facilitate this transition, such as what the European Union is currently doing on this topic of the due diligence or responsible procurement practices. So today it is really, really time to ally. The new word is collaboration. Competition is for this time in the situation of emergency something we have to put aside clearly. And that's why I am really pledging for a push from different type of institution, and especially the European Union.
Thank you very much, Jean-Christophe. Now Anne-Laure. So Anne-Laure has a unique position of as a leader in a big consulting firm of observing many corporations, and also, Anne-Laure, you're sitting on the board of several corporations. I'm thinking of CACIB in particular, which is the investment bank of Crédit Agricole. So how do you look at this question at our question, Anne-Laure, with your perspective now?
Yes, thank
and
you.
By the way, sorry, before launching your discussion, I invite all the attendees to ask their questions through the chat. Sorry, Anne-Laure.
No problem. So I will also focus on soft points that Jean-Christophe already raised. So for me, the CSR trend within business, and not a CSR trend on the side, but within business, has taken off. And I think it will continue to do so in the future because there is some pressure, as you said, Jean-Christophe. First one would be regulation or institutional pressure. Second one will be employer branding, because the company needs to recruit. And procurement and reputation. As for regulation in Europe, as you may know, the CSRD directive will extend the scope of reporting, and more companies will have to follow some standards. And what is interesting is that there will be differentiation between large companies and smaller one for SMEs, and also unlisted SMEs will be incitated to use this CSRD on a voluntary basis. As for financial sector, also the European Bank will have to submit a 10-year climate plan, for example. So there is a more and more incitation and regulation to be followed. And I can testify that by my own involvement within the board and risk committees at CACIB, I've seen that topic addressed, training given to board members have also moved to climate and environmental risk. And they were not on the agenda maybe 5 years ago. And now I think that every committee we have and every board, we have this topic on the agenda. As for procurement, public purchasing includes more and more ESG criteria, as well as do large enterprise purchasing department. And as a consulting firm, we now faces questions on the way assignment will go on, qualification of the impact of scenarios, etc. Our own CSR policy is just a must-have. So it's going on, and stress is put on that topic. As for employer branding, I think there is some key point that young generation have now two main questions. And as a consulting firm, also we recruit a lot. And the question is, why do we do what we are asked to do? And what is my company doing to show exemplarity? And otherwise, they zap and find another more attractive place to work. I can give the example of a pharmaceutical company that set up a mentoring session with young people and young leaders. And the discussion turned around the purpose of such and such job and next move. So why do we move to that job more than on responsibilities, power, money, and things like that? As for reputation, I think that the main question for companies is the paradox to be able, as you say, Jean-Christophe, to show their transition path, recognize their inconsistencies, and yet not being bashed for that. And I think that the question is that let's allow the company to transition, to make that transition. How can they communicate on that? It's very, very difficult for big companies. And it's a question that is particular reason for agro-food, banks, pharmaceutical, for example. As the COVID has taken place, and you ask Aude if it changed things, I think that COVID may have exacerbated some topics, such as ways of working, why do we have an office, how we will use it in the future, what is a company, what makes an enterprise. Same thing for our mobility, when do we have to meet, and what can be done remotely and still be efficient and attractive. And it also reveal or put a magnifying glass on the major link between health, local production, supply chain. So I think it arises also opportunities for CSR matter. But there is a question mark that remains on the economic consequences of the crisis and the capacity to repay loans for some company. But I do not think that the move can be stopped. And it is not because some CSR budgets are cut. The real transformations supported by the business are not financed and not on their way. Transitions are not the CSR department prerogative, and more. So I think that it's a matter of business. So money will come to help that transition, I think.
Thank you very much, Anne-Laure. Maybe we can move on to Helle. Helle?
Yes, thanks, Aude. Thank you very much. And Hello, good morning to my fellow INSEAD alumni and all of the others that are listening in today. Let me start by saying that I am an internal optimist. So I was not allowed to vote, but I would clearly have voted two, meaning involved and optimistic. I think that we are approaching a tipping point, which is very important to recognize. And you will hear from what I'm going to say that, I feel that we are really making progress and things are happening on the side of moving to a different kind of doing business altogether. So Aude started out by giving a presentation of the B Corp movement, but I thought I would just elaborate just a little bit on that. I don't know how many of you are aware of B Corps and the B Corp movement. It's a brand that is becoming more and more visible, and we are seeing a lot of track and acceleration on that side. But I recognize that it is not yet a kind of a mainstream brand. So just to say that the B Corp is a global movement. It's an NGO, so it's important to understand that. It's been active since 2006. So you imagine 2 years before the financial crisis, this organization was already up and running and was talking about, purpose, moving from shareholder to stakeholder capitalism, sustainability, purpose, etc. So it's pretty much a first mover from that respect. And it's one of the reasons I got involved some years ago to bring the movement, to create an organization for the movement here in France. It's because they have been around for so long, and therefore obviously has a maturity which is interesting, and which means that they have the ability to give a very strong direction around these topics. The movement started in the US, but today it's clearly a global movement, and it has representations in more than 75 countries around the world. So what do we do? Well, we talk about system failure, that the existing economic system has failed. It just doesn't work, this shareholder capitalism. We see it in terms of increasing inequalities. There is no invisible hand. It's kind of come to a stage where it's pretty clear that we need to move to something else. It's also pretty clear in a world where the boundaries are now well known to everyone, information is available to everyone. We know that it is not possible from a sustainability perspective to continue the way that we have done. And so our message is all about moving from shareholder to stakeholder capitalism, the systemic change around that. And how do we actually do this? Well, we do it by proposing to businesses to measure what matters. That means to take a very holistic view of the impact that a business has on all of its stakeholders. So whether that impact is negative or positive, obviously with the ambition to move to positive impact. And the businesses that are best in class, that are really, really far along on the journey of providing positive impact, they can ask to go through an audit and become B Corps, or obtain the label of becoming a B Corp. It's very difficult to obtain, and it's not our ambition to be a certification company. It's our ambition to be an NGO and really provide the label to the best in class and use them as ambassadors to show what is possible and to inspire others to follow. So a few examples just of who are B Corps. You can think of very well-known companies like Patagonia. Clearly is very far on this impact road towards taking a different view on what it means to operate a company today. But also many subsidiaries of Danone, and Emmanuel Faber had publicly announced that his goal was for all of Danone to become a B Corp in 2025. And Danone has already labeled a really large part of its subsidiaries around the world as B Corps. But of course, also a large proportion of small and medium-sized companies. And in France, we see an amazing growth. We have, since we set up the French chapter of the movement, you know, the growth is just so amazing. And we have today 160 companies that are labeled B Corp. And we have as many in the pipeline already, and as many, you know, working to get into the pipeline. So it's quite amazing as a movement. So of course I'm very optimistic because I'm surrounded by businesses that kind of got it, that knows what needs to happen, and that are looking for these solutions. So when Aude asked me to talk about the tension between purpose and or profit, I would say within our movement, it's all about the end. You know, it's not about purpose or profit. It's really about how do we do purpose and profit, because it's very obvious that without profit, you know, there won't be any businesses, and we worked with for profits. And so the whole idea is, how do you change the entire DNA of the role of business from moving from this total focus on shareholders to a balanced focus on all stakeholders, within which obviously shareholders are an important part. And from my perspective, I think that the COVID crisis has become like a magnifying glass. You know, there was already a trend that was very strong before the crisis of businesses needing to move, and particularly the sustainability thread and the environment has been clearly around for and known for businesses for some time. But I think the crisis has shown us that there are other really big threats out there that we need to tackle. And it kind of became a perfect time for business also to reconsider the long time role in society. So what is really our end goal in doing business? You know, what's our license to operate in a post-COVID world? How do we contribute to a better future? And I think that the public opinion plays a big role here also, that there is kind of less and less excitement or tolerance around businesses that just seem to be around to kind of serve a limited circle of investors or people who are deriving direct, immediate financial gains from it. So from my perspective, the path that business is on today, and again, we are very different stages. It's no longer about doing less bad. You know, that's obviously something that is important, but it is really how do we turn on the business engine to do more good. And I mean by that, you know, to solve the systemic challenges of our time by and large. How do we use the innovation, the creativity, the power, the economic strength of business to bring about that change? So it's really for me about solving all these challenges through the use of business. And in the B Corp movement, we like to say that we work with companies that are looking to become not the best in the world, but the best for the world. And then I wanted just to talk to you also about, so kind of where are we today? And I think that from that perspective, as we move out of the COVID crisis, we see very much that there are two parallel worlds existing. You know, there are those who want to go back to normal as quickly as possible and just turn the page. And I like to call them the kind of the gatekeepers of the old system. And then I see that there are those who are pushing for system change. could kind of come out of the crisis more convinced than ever that the system needs to change. And I think that it's very important to understand that there isn't enough information out there around this new role of business. I think by and large, many businesses still kind of ignore the opportunities that are out there in terms of getting on the impact side and becoming part of the solution rather than becoming part of the problem. So thanks, Aude. I think that those were the reflection I wanted to make around the tensions between purpose and profit.
Thank you very much, Helle. So Suvi, with the double perspective of the professor, taking a step back and your involvement in the question of performance and progress, how do you take the question?
Thank you and good morning. You know, I think I'm still reflecting on the poll that you put up, and sometimes I feel when we look back at the long history of at least modern humanity, let's say the last 5,000 or 10,000 years, you know, how can one not be at least hopeful, if not optimistic? So if we take maybe even the last 200 years, and maybe particularly the last 200 years, there's tremendous reasons to think that, you know, if we fast forward another 100 years, then maybe things will be in a better place. But the next 10, 20, 30 years, I don't know. If you look at the doomsday clock, they've been the atomic scientist group, which is kind of a weird group, but every year they set the time on the doomsday clock, and it has never been closer to midnight. In 2021, it's 17 seconds to midnight. In 2000, it was 17 minutes to midnight. And so, you know, some people fear environmental collapse. The defense budgets in the world keep increasing. And whether it is in Asia, whether it is in the Middle East, whether it is in Africa, or even in North America, and we wonder about cyber threats. So are we going into a kind of scenario of war? And of course, nationalism has been on the rise. So it's very hard to be realistic and optimistic, because we've been talking a lot for the last, let's say 1970 was the first year when we kind of recognized the environment as an important system. But I think as all the three panelists before have said, and I think I've really learned a lot. One of the things I wanted to do, Aude, was to listen and learn. And I know for me, just listening to Jean-Christophe and Helle has been very, very valuable. And I would say, you know, the point that Helle was making about systems, we have a biosystem that we inherited, that we were endowed with a biosystem. That system is in very poor condition if we look at all the statistics and indicators. We don't need to look at the Canadian temperatures, etc., but California and drought and etc. If we have a second system that we created, which was the political system, and the political system, whether it is abstention in France or a kind of nationalistic, polarized pulling apart of communities and societies, and the mockery that people now make of democracy as elections. And so you asked whether people are interested or involved. We could ask the same question about the political system. Are people interested and involved? And the answer to both seems to be no. And of course, people, you know, used to listen to news or radio and newspapers, and now it's a very different information landscape with social media. And the third system we had, so the biosystem, the political system, both in trouble. The third system, the economic system, is, I think, really in serious trouble. Markets have given us amazing, I mean, the big challenge is that, you know, markets were created to deliver output, and they have succeeded beyond our wildest expectations. We have almost a $90 to $100 trillion world economy, but that's an economy of output. In the 21st century, it's clear that we're moving from an output-oriented expectation of the economy to an outcome-oriented expectation of the economy. And output is not outcome. GDP is output. Well-being is an outcome. Fairness is an outcome. Health is an outcome. Medicines are output. We can have all the vaccines, and the US is spending 20% of GDP on health. But in terms of outcomes, whether we look at even life expectancy, but obesity, et cetera, and mental health is not so clear. Otherwise, the opioid crisis would not be what it is. And partly COVID, partly opioid, partly so many factors. Even the life expectancy in the US was reduced in the last, in what is considered to be one of the most economically advanced countries. And so when we think about the 10 billion people that are supposed to be on our planet by 2050, that is just in one generation, with an average per capita already, the world average per capita GDP is $10,000. And meat consumption, which has a big impact then on land and water, not to mention health and food supply chains. So I think as we address problems, Ode, new issues are emerging, partly because of our success, demographic success and economic success. 10 billion people is a demographic success. And those people are going to come in places like India and the Middle East, where there is no water. We cannot, you know, fabricate water. Desalination is a very energy intensive the way we do it right now. We can't transport water. So we can transport food, or we can have migration, which makes other problems. And then when I look at the coming, you know, we've just begun on technology. And the service productivity that is underway right now means that 70% of people in the world work in services. How are we going to upskill and reskill? And we have a demographic challenge of aging, so we need people to work. So retirement ages are being pushed out. But if people don't have the requisite skills, it's going to be super hard. And who is going to retrain? Are the markets that produced output going to produce outcomes such as fairness? I don't think so. So government steps in with regulation, as Anne-Laure mentioned, and regulation is important. But, you know, we have seen from banking to airlines, from mining to pharmaceuticals, regulations are not the full answer. They may not be even a good answer. And regulations lead to lobbying, as we now see with the technology companies, which leads to a further decline in trust and the system. So I think, you know, when we look at the concentration in Silicon Valley, it's just a crazy. Should you be optimistic that there are so many 250 billionaires in Silicon Valley? Or should you be pessimistic that there are 250,000 homeless people in Silicon Valley? When I go there, I promise you, it looks like I'm in India. You have the rich and the poor just side by side. It's just crazy to imagine that in the 21st century, we have these kinds of you know, contradictions that are so evident, not to mention the issues on privacy or concentration of market power. So my feeling is that I would answer your question, all of the above. You know, many things are getting better, but maybe it's not fast enough. And I think, as Hella said, it is a systemic thing. And it's the paradigm itself, the economic paradigm, the civic paradigm. And some of us bet on technology. Some of us bet on regulation. And I think, as others have mentioned, it's not just, I mean, the good news. So if we wanted to be optimistic, we could at least say that the investors seem to have clearly now shown that they are at least starting to ask about the whole profile on ESG, and a Morningstar gives these star ratings and so on. A BlackRock at least talks about this. And I think Jean-Christophe was saying, you know, those contradictions. So we see investors moving, we see producers moving, at least I do. I don't think as consumers we have moved enough. I think even employees have moved more. Organizations like the B Lab and B Corp are so crucial. The GRI, SASB, B Lab, ISO. There is an amazing infrastructure that is coming. But I think, you know, so the movement is definitely happening. I also think, given demography, technology, etc., and water especially, not to mention racial inclusion, gender, family, we have a long road. I think the entire 21st century will be taken improving the economic system. So in the long run, I am optimistic. In the short run, I'm involved and hopeful. And I'm so glad that this morning you took the time to pull us together and have one more dot in that big journey.
Thank you very much, Subi. I'm now going to, I would have direct questions for you, but I'm leaving some space for questions coming from people who are in our assembly now. And maybe Solène, who has kindly accepted to help me out reading the questions, will draw them up for you all. And don't forget, I'm saying also a word for our attendees. Next turn is about lessons and what do we learn from this, and what recommendations do our panelists have. So I'm just a short session of Q&A, and we're coming back to our panelists. Solène?
Yes.
Can you sum this up? Thank you very much, Solène.
And we have indeed already quite a few questions on the how and what recommendation would the panelists
So
have.
we can deal with that after.
Yeah. So, but a first question for an attendee is why now? So the concept of strategic purpose has arisen quite before, and Gary Hamel talked about it, raised it in the early 90s. So why does this subject, strategic purpose, arise so strong today and is now viewed as a source of competitive advantage in the corporate world? Why now? And anyone can answer.
I mean, I'll just go and say, you know, the most important thing is the empirical developments around us. It took George Floyd being killed in front of a camera for suddenly racial inclusion to just break. Now, why now? It's been, you know, racism has existed for hundreds, if not longer, years. When you see certain facts, when we see the droughts, when we see the inequality, when we see the patterns, whether it is the 20th hottest year in record, whether we see migration coming because of displacement. And so why now? Yes, we also had concerns about these things 200 years ago at the very founding of modern business. But I think right now it's become unavoidable that and it's affecting us directly. And I think the courts are going more and more, whether it is Monsanto or whether it is J&J, McKinsey paying a fine of $600 million, Goldman Sachs paying fines, and the courts have moved. So there is a rights movement, and this rights movement started with, initially civil rights, and then moved on to, or labor rights and civil rights, and then it moved on to, more broad rights of the environment. We talk about ecocide, we talk about Anthropocene. All of these things are partly empirical, partly legal, and it's a gross failure of both markets and governments. People hoped that markets were self-correcting in a time horizon that was reasonable, which hasn't happened. And they thought governments would kind of step in and somehow protect them. Government failure is also rampant, and the COVID has again shown us that governments cannot do everything. Governments must take care of security, but not all. And so I think between the empirical patterns and between the failure of existing systems, people are now finally understanding, okay, let's go to the source of some of these things, which is the consumer and the producer.
I will add that we've seen also with the COVID crisis, we finally discover that we need to produce locally, be able to transport goods, and be able to have plants turning and continue to produce. And I think that that's also it's strange. Why now do we consider that it's important to produce in our country or be able to have good health and things like that? So I think it's the same. It's the urge, maybe.
And I would add to that, I think that the COVID crisis, like Anne-Laure said, actually served kind of as this magnifying glass, because first of all, for all of us as citizens of the world, it meant that all these crises and threats that we hear about, they are not just coming from some scientific report. It was actually at our doorstep. And at the same time, for those who were not kind of first in line fighting the crisis, or who got very ill or directly affected by the crisis, it was probably also a time to step back and think and kind of just have this stepping back and taking a different view on life altogether. Which I think has affected a lot of people as we come out of this crisis. And finally, it also showed business that there were lots of things that business could actually do here. We had this campaign within B-Lab France, where the French B Corps, we called it, one day, one solution, where the B Corps actually went out there and provided a lot of help to hospitals, etc. There were so many things. It was actually so easy to do good. It was not something that was a threat for business and which was very difficult. It was hands-on and easy, and it had this self-sustaining effect on business, and it makes everyone feel good. So I also think that played a big role.
So then perhaps one more question, because I mean, then we need to proceed to the second part, which is how. I think it's burning question. So, so how and what lessons and what to do. So, but before, maybe you can take one. We can take one more question, and I ask my panelists to answer quite shortly, so that we can move on to the second part.
All right, so I need to choose.
Sorry, Soren.
No problem. Maybe a question about, notably to Hele, but to all. We talked about doing good, or at least doing less bad. So are you confident that big corporations can cancel or compensate their negative externalities, such as plastic waste? And more globally, what can be done to avoid doing bad things?
But now we're very much into the how, I think, so let me just jump to a couple of things. I think that what is very important is that let's be really transparent and honest about this. Such an example as plastic, for instance, nobody today has all of the solutions on how to deal with these issues. But what is important is to work together. It's this idea of interdependence that we talk a lot about within the B Corp movement, to become kind of a laboratory of exchange of good practices among the businesses that go on this, that decide to follow this the track of reducing their emissions and dealing with the plastic issue that we have today. the idea is, go together and we can go far together and we will find the solutions, but we need to start. We need to start with the awareness and the desire to do something about it. And I think that collaboration, as Jean-Christophe said, which is very well defined within the SDG number 17, this idea that we all need to work together in partnerships and open doors and work with stakeholders that businesses were not, usually engaging with before. That's very much part of the solution.
Probably, if I may jump in here, I think Subi highlighted the need for the increase of consume citizenship movement. And what is critical is that we really need to reinvent marketing. I think this function is one of the less innovative, aside of sometimes, and I don't want to point out, but this is a critical one that has to completely redesign its way of interacting with the consumer. It's starting, but the topic is not convincing to buy. It's about empowering the consumer to make the right choice. Empowering the consumer to make the right choice. And after 30 years of mass consumption driven by the so-called single basic message, marketing now has clearly to reinvent through authenticity, transparency, the way they will contribute to the consumer education. One thing that I want to highlight as a very good practice, that is this famous Nutri-Score that you saw now, that is raising. It started indeed from a private corporation initiative, and I think Danone was among the companies that pushed this Nutri-Score. And now it is under the responsibility of a non-for-profit organization, even though you have different type of actors that are contributing to give this transparency with something that might look very basic, but at least something you can catch very easily, A, B, C, D, okay? And I know it may look not so funny in a way, because good story is still need to be part of the marketing paradigm, and I'm pledging for making the things fun. We all need to be inspired in a way, but at least it has to now it is really time for embracing this new complexity, where you will have multiple type of claims, multiple type of channel to engage your consumer, and with key fundamentals in mind. Again, if you want trust, you have to deserve trust after, as I said, nearly now even 20 years of greenwashing. Authenticity, transparency, and then from that you can build very innovative way of engaging the consumer to create this movement of consumer citizenship. And again, that is one, for me, important things that we have to acknowledge. In some country we can vote, in some country we can advocate, but in all countries in the world, most we can buy differently. And this is a tremendous power that we have to activate.
Okay, so now thank you very much, Jean-Christophe, and I'm announcing officially that we have stepped in our second part, which is lessons and recommendations for action and advices for us all. So maybe I want to invite our dear panelists to be a bit short, because we need still a second Q&A session before the end of our meeting. I think it will be appreciated by our attendees. But and maybe I want to pass the word to Anne-Laure, because I know that Anne-Laure has something to say about maybe a higher within organizations, what and within business, what lessons and what recommendation for action, Anne-Laure? Is there a higher level to reach, and how do you see things?
Yeah, thank you, Aude. Maybe I would like to come back and step on what has been said also on the stakeholder things, because I think that we talked about shifting from shareholders to stakeholders, and the question will be also the incidence of multi-stakeholders governance. So it's complex, but there are things to do. I think that CSR is strategic, and we've seen that maybe climate will be key for the business resilience. But for me, it questions also the image associated with CSR. You told Jean-Christophe that marketing has to reinvent. I think also that CSR has to do something, because the related positioning within a company, I think it's not good for now in some companies. It can't be HR, it must be strategy and business. So I think there is also a question about that. How do in the company, in the organization, this business and how these actions are taken within business and within functions. I think also that when talking about strategy, we must talk about open strategy. That is strategy to be built with the stakeholder, including them for real. I think that when we ask company, and I made some survey for that, how do you want to include your stakeholders in the construction and the governance of your strategy? It seems to be easier for companies with general public interest, public service activities. There is some reluctance now found within family-owned or very exposed businesses because of the pressure of NGOs. So they don't want to have them around the table, but some do. So maybe how do we can go better on that? And also it's sent back to the question of transparency and to be allowed, as I said, to conduct a business model transition. How we are allowed to take the time to do that also. And then last, there is a lot of buzzword now, purpose, vision, but there is also business plan, CSR. So all these objects, how do you align them, and how do you have them being consistent? So I can give you an example for a company who is in the field of gambling activities. So what they decide to do, they decide that the purpose includes the CSR policy. So it's one thing. They set up a compass. This purpose is a compass consistent with the 2025 strategy. It has been defined by collaborative work within and outside the company. Engagements rolled out in action plans through the company and with the stakeholders. The question of the brand that you set up, Jean-Christophe, they decided to restructure the brand communication around the purpose. And also they decided to involve for real the stakeholders within the governance. So consistency. Same thing for a French airport that decided to have the alignment with the purpose, followed by a specific stakeholders committee within the governance. So I think that maybe more and more companies will include even if it's not called so, purpose reflection, CSR inclusion within their strategic plan. And last, I think there is also a question between how do we balance between do not harm and positive impact. So I think that a pure risk approach is not the solution. Most measurements are set for that now. And so we need to define how to appreciate the for good, or what Subi told about the outcome, how we can appreciate them, put them in the light. Thank you.
Who next? Maybe Subi, you want to say a few words about culture of integration? I don't know.
Okay, so I think just picking up on, sure. So maybe half a dozen quick points. I think, focusing on outcomes, whatever the enterprise, whatever the sector, and trying to understand how do we drive that in the goals of the company. So a company had only one goal, which was performance, and it was only assessed on that one goal. And I think now we acknowledge that there is at least another goal. It may not be as big, as important, but it used to be, progress was, performance was 110 and progress may be -10. We can no longer have that. Maybe it's 90-10 in some cases, maybe 70-30 in others. And, people need to understand, what do we mean by outcomes? What do we mean by progress? So I say very simply 4 things. Number 1, fairness. If you want trust, the most important thing is people should feel that the economic system is more fair. Secondly, well-being. Thirdly, nature, ecosystems, water, energy, climate, etc. And fourthly, future. And the way to achieve this is we learned about innovation, but I think we need to now learn about integration. And this integration, as Anne-Laure says, does not happen just in some delegated manner in a CSR department anymore. The integration happens in strategy, happens in operations, and it happens in governance. If you are not working on the strategy, what products, what markets, what business model, operations, what supply chain, how you treat your workers, how you educate them, how you take care of their safety, how inclusive are you, or with the supply chain. And in terms of governance, what is the purpose? What is the time horizon? What is the leadership selection incentive design? So integration happens in SOG, which is the spine of business. And for this to happen effectively, we need to, not depend on regulation, but education. We need better models, methods, and measures of progress, just like we have models, methods, and measures of performance. And I think this is where the B Labs and the others are really so very important. In fact, I think on education, business schools like INSEAD, and every business school has a huge important role to play on research, but also today, we tell the MBAs, MBA means Master of Better Alternatives. Is no longer business administration. We need better alternatives. And I would say, that these are some of the thoughts given the time when one could go on. Maybe the last point is, we have focused the last century on building competence and investing in competence of people. We need to take time this century to build the character of human capital. Human capital is not just competence, it is also moral character. And companies are fictions. It is the people inside companies who have to make moral choices. And they can do that if they have moral character. And moral character, is about caring, is about commitment, and is about courage. It's not about power. It's not about authority. And we have not yet started to teach that in a systematic way. I think this is what I would say. So there's a lot of work for business schools and scholars to do.
Thank you, Subi, Professor of Master of Better Alternatives. I'll remember that. Hella, maybe you want to go on with your toolbox.
Yes, I would love to. And building on what Subi said, which I am, of course, 100% aligned with, I would say that it's very natural for me to talk about the tools that we propose within the B Corp movement. And I do that without any kind of marketing, because those tools, that's our intellectual property. They are proposed online for free of charge for anyone to use, which is our, NDO part. So we proposed a tool called the BIA assessment, which is around 200 questions that a business can go through and basically get out of this both a compass and a map of navigation in terms of how to move from shareholder to stakeholder capitalism, and in terms of measuring its impact, both negative and positive, because we actually within this tool are also able to give you indications on measurement of your positive impact, and also a lot of things in there in terms of how to improve. So a lot of tips and recommendations on how to build a strategy on becoming an impact-based business. And of course, in France, we also have legislation now. We have the famous PACT law that has been now in existence for 2 years, and which provide a legal framework which you can use also to change this idea of moving from shareholder to stakeholder capitalism. And in many other countries, again, very much driven by the advocacy of B-Lab. We have the so-called benefit corporations, obviously in the US, but also in Italy. And again, through the French PACT law, we have something similar or comparable here in France. And I think it's very important for businesses also to look at these legal and regulatory aspects of how they're actually set up and what their defined purpose is, what they report out to the world publicly that they are here to do. And one word on communication, I like what Jean-Christophe said about the importance of marketing, and I would take it even further and say, I think that we need to move away from brand communication and focus much more on corporate communication, which is something that hasn't, we've all been very much used to looking at advertising for brands that we want to buy, but we need to look much more about who are we buying from? What is this company here to do? And do we accept as citizens to put our money to this company? In the US, in the B Corp movement, they had a campaign which we didn't think, the wording probably wasn't very fit for Europe, but I'm still going to tell you what it was called. It was called Vote with Your Wallet. And I think that is it. We can all become activists with how we spend our money and what we buy. And my final word would be to say, again, building on what Subi said, aligning personal and professional values. Each of us as citizens can do this and decide whether we want to become whether we want to be part of the problem or part of the solution in terms of where we work, in terms of what we buy, in terms of how we live. And I think that is very important. And, there is this Buddhistic saying, to bring something more spiritual into this discussion, which says that the longest journey that a person can take is traveling the 50 centimeters that separate your head from your heart. And I think it's important that we all get on this journey to go to our heart and live our lives in everything that we do, and also how we work, not only with our brain, but also with our heart.
Thank you very much, Helle. Jean-Christophe, do you feel that you have expressed yourself on lessons and recommendations, or do you want to add a word before we have?
Can I answer to a few questions that were on the chat very, very quickly?
Yes.
Someone asked how to fund this transition. We haven't talked at all about what we may have said a few words and probably Laure did, but there is this topic of the rise of impact investment and the ESG and strengthening the ESG. This ESG topic is still under construction. It represents 37 trillion and it could reach 53 trillion by 2025. So we have definitely to reinforce the ESG part because investors are critical for this transition. And then there is this rising movement of the impact investing, which is different and of course much more ambition in the way we measure the famous outcome rather than the output. That is today around 520 billion, and we all hope that here we can find an innovative way of recognizing the positive externalities, and we can elaborate around this further on. So it's not only about the local administration or whoever, different type of institution to find the proper mechanism, either through tax or through different type of incentive. It is also a question of moving the needle with the impact investment. Someone asked, what is your recommendation to build a successful business case for sustainability? And indeed, I think it's critical that we start from building a platform of business benefit. How to do this, if I may, and most of you mentioned this several times, and I think, Rudy, you started by the generous listening. Let's start by listening to our stakeholders. I mean, building a business platform of benefit, it's again with a lot of different type of stakeholders, procure your suppliers, your client, your consumer, the local administration, all this type of people that will strengthen your license to operate. We may have a tendency to jump too quickly into action, even though I will pledge for action, you will see after. But really, I encourage anyone to take the time to make a deep analysis of what is the feedback of all the different type of stakeholders and analyze very precisely what type of challenge you will have to overcome. We spend too much time by defining the wrong actions because we didn't analyze the right problem. And to analyze the right problem and be specific as much as we can, take the time to listen to the stakeholders. Second advice to build a business case is start with your strength. I mean, there are many things that are good and done in the right way, but they are not at scale. And I will pledge today for any type of actions or innovation has to be designed for the scale up. It has to be thought in a way that it will scale. I saw too many organizations that they say, oh, let's try this, which is good because action is unleashing the power of transformation. I clearly believe in this, but it has to be, as I think you highlighted, it has to be part of something that is strategically driven with a governance, with rewarding system where your HR is very consistent in the way you recognize the performance. And all the investment plan you need to put behind in the case you will scale up. So again, A, take the time to listen to your stakeholders. B, if you build a business of business benefit, start with your strength. And C, while acting, please let's try to think all innovation with the ambition of scaling up. And that's a couple of things I want to add. Concretely, another thing that was a question around partnership and alliances. I would like to encourage you to look at an initiative named B4IG. I have the great pleasure to lead the incubator of this alliance, Business for Inclusive Growth. I think here you have a component, 80% of the partnership today are failing. And we know the reason. I don't want to elaborate around this, but 80% are failing. And in this alliance, for the first time ever, I started to see that there are the component of something that can basically transform. Working group to align on best practices and standard. An incubator that is walking the talk with programs or projects that aim at scaling up. And C, a financing forum where impact investors will be connected with the issuers. So this type of alliance driven by this triple type of dynamic, for me, are indeed instrumental for driving the change we are looking for.
Thank you, Jean-Christophe. Solène, do you have one question to bounce back to Herlus? We have 4 minutes left. Do you have one key question, Solène? Or should I pass the word for a short conclusion for Herlus to be and Laure directly? Solène?
Yes. So one question, so thank you. And Jean-Christophe already started to answer some others. Maybe to compare the situation on a global scale, how are continents or countries doing comparing to each other? And notably, a question was raised twice about what about China? How is China doing?
So, dear panelists, we have 3 minutes left, so please be very short and add a word if you want a sort of header, if you want some additional thought to be communicated to everyone. Who wants to go?
I actually already answered it in the chat. Maybe you didn't see it. I think there was a question about, is the B Corp movement also present in China? And yes, it is. There are also B Corps, and the movement is also active in China.
Okay.
So,
Le mot de la fin, Anne-Laure. So to say, everyone's
Maybe
bilingual or nearly.
to go back to your first question, I think that this panel made me more optimistic, and I want to engage more.
Thank you very much, Subi.
I think so much has been said, and I would say it's not really. I do think we should just be aware that there is a J curve. Things get worse before they get better, even inside a company, even for ourselves, changing, what Hella said, how we live, how we consume, where we work, who we associate with. And somebody had said, money is the currency of the economy, time is the currency of life. And I think really being more mindful about our time and bringing that meaning. That's what I would encourage people. I think so much good stuff has been said. Thank you.
Any additional word?
Maybe just end by stressing the role that INSEAD plays in this, because INSEAD is what brings us all together this morning. And I think that INSEAD was very early on to pick up the idea of business and society. And as you know, the pivoting around this whole topic and to be renaming the MBA. And I think it's so important. And I think it's so important that we all push INSEAD to make this the primary focus of the business school of the 21st century, to give them the legitimacy to carry this topic before any other topic, because it is the primary topic of the 21st century.
Or if I may add one point on that, I just finished teaching an MBA class on this topic. And at the beginning of the class, not at the end, at the beginning, we do a poll like you did, and we give students 10 points. And we say, if you had to allocate this, business has to focus on performance, but business should also look at progress. How many points do you think you would allocate for business to look at performance, and how many for? And, we had no idea, but we thought something like 8 and 2. To our surprise, 50 students, and the median was 5 and 5. These students today at the beginning of such a course are already saying, okay, 5 points for performance, 5. And the other point that I'd like to underline, I spoke about character and courage, and we asked, where does courage come from? There are many sources of very complicated, there's no good research on this. So it's something we will look at in moral psychology. Where does courage come from to act? But one important source of courage is performance. If you are not making cost of capital, if you are not taking care of performance, it's going to be very hard. We talk about the license to operate, but performance gives you the license to lead. So please don't neglect performance.
So I think we've come to an end now. I want to thank you very much. I think we have been listening to great things, because an enthusiasm is emerging, a meaning is emerging from this, but also with honesty of looking at the question with honesty on the tensions and the difficulties. So many thanks to you all. Sorry for the attendees who didn't have their questions answered to. And life must go on, and vive business for good. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks,
Aude. Thank you.
Thanks for the organization, Aude.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Solène.